Praxis Prepper.
Hey everybody, this is Praxis.
Meow! This is Huples Cat. This is a VR to Praxis Preppers video on Your World is on the Edge of Collapse. It's an interesting video. It's one of his mini-series because he actually doesn't spend much time and effort editing it.
And in this video I want to convey to you what's really going on in my head right now. I know on my channel I like to present kind of a happy-go-lucky attitude about things while things could always go sideways and things could always go bad, I always like to think that that's a small chance and that generally things go reasonably well.
In this video, Praxis Prepper is not really doing his normal type of video where it's man succeeds, man achieves, everything gets happy even though the situation's bad. He's actually, if you read between the lines, actually saying that his title is not clickbait.
We prep for those moments in life when things don't go well.
And in it he discusses his two main threats that he preps for. One is economic collapse of the American dollar, because everything's about America, right? And also about environmental issues. So both of those things I actually prep for, though to be frank I don't really prep that much for an economic collapse. But my main focus has always been prepping for environmental degradation and failure, because I actually think that's more likely than almost anything else out there, including nuclear war.
Anyhow, so a lot of times on my channel, I don't really want to push the idea that things are imminent. There are plenty of YouTube prepping channels out there that do that all the time, and I'm a fan of many of them. They act as kind of like a fire under my butt to get me thinking, I really gotta get up and do a little bit more work because things could go bad and I don't want that to happen to myself and my family.
There's a fundamental difference between fear porn doomer channels and generally emergency preparedness channels, and there is some part of us all that is attracted and entertained in some sort of a sick way to the fear porn doom channels where everything is always about to completely collapse. Now a lot of those channels are just garbage, and a lot of those channels aren't even worth watching. A few of them that have specialised over the last little while in doom because they're seeing things occurring which they believe will inevitably lead to a societal collapse actually are worth watching, because they actually are giving you skills and ideas to prepare now to deal with what they see as inevitable, which may not be inevitable. The future is always uncertain.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, how I'm feeling in terms of there being a fire under my ass right now with what's coming down the road ahead of us. And I'm not used to talking like this, but I'm pretty concerned at the moment.
I think a lot of us are. I am pretty concerned. I've always calculated and figured out that by 2026 the world's supply of food would actually be outstripped by the world's demand for food. And I also am a strong person who believes in various things that are going wrong, because I can see the data and I can see the empirical evidence as well as I can see the local evidence that climate is becoming unstable. Today in Toronto it's May 28th and it's about 37 Fahrenheit and it's raining heavily with some snow in between it. And that's very strange because yesterday it was really hot and the day before it was in the 90s. So we're having very hot, very cold, very damp, very dry weather, and it's altering daily. And that's not usual for the 28th of May in my part of the world, and it actually amplifies what's been going on over the last few years in my part of the world. What's going on in my part of the world is called weather. What's going on the planet Earth is called climate, and people study climate science for specific reasons.
I think the last time that I released a video like this was in January, just before COVID happened. It was about a month before Trump issued his statement saying that it was going to all magically go away. It wasn't going to be any kind of a big deal. It wasn't going to kill people. It was going to stop at 7 people or whatever. Even mainstream media wasn't really paying attention to it. But myself and some other people in the prepper sphere were really concerned about it. There were a lot of characteristics of what was coming down the road with COVID that had us concerned, and there are a lot of similar characteristics now.
I think the first video I did was January 22nd, 2020 on SARS-CoV-2.
A new type of coronavirus was recently found in a pneumonia outbreak in central China's Wuhan city.
Really? I didn't know. Actually, I did know. But I'll tell you something here. There's a lot of videos online, a ton of videos online, and very, very few of them are from people with any medical or nursing background. I happen to be a registered nurse, a proud registered nurse in Canada, and I originally was trained in the United Kingdom, and I'm currently a hospital administrator at a major hospital in the Toronto, Canada area. And I just want to tell people, mostly my subscribers, about some facts and actual reality behind the new threat. Honestly, if there is a shadow government and they want to kill large numbers of us, this is not a very effective way of doing it. So don't worry too much. Do have a think about your pandemic supplies. Maybe spend half an hour to an hour this week and think about how prepared you are to deal with an infectious outbreak that is lethal to a tiny number of people but causing huge effects in the place you live. If you really want to get into prepping, think about what you would do if we lose 15% of the population over a 4-month period of time, because we will at some point. I just don't think it's going to be from this virus. I could be wrong. Anyway, toodles! That was a Bad Terrier 2020 production. And I kind of underplayed it, I think, a little bit in reaction to the fear and doom craziness that I was seeing all through early January online. But by February I was actually putting out content that will enable people to actually be protected in a pandemic. And if people had followed my advice, they probably would not have been able to catch it unless they were very unlucky.
Related to supply chains, environmental factors, economic factors, and I'm being honest, I'm pretty concerned at the moment. I'm kind of in high gear, trying to get myself to a point where I'm feeling a little bit better. And you guys who've been watching my channel for a while, I'm in a pretty comfortable place. I've got access to water here on my land. We just finished our new homestead build. That's all working great, but not everything's complete. I've done videos on this in the past as well. No matter how much preparation you've accomplished, you can always do more.
Indeed, you can always do more, and there's always somebody out there that's done more than you or is better than you at anything you actually want to put on video. It's one of the exciting things of being a video creator, is actually learning from the audience.
So it's, you don't want to get too big into the game of, critiquing like, oh, I'm ahead of you or you're behind me or whatever, because no matter where you are, you can always improve your situation. So that's where I am right now, and again, I'm feeling a great deal of urgency. Again, between economic factors and supply chain factors and environmental factors.
Second time he's mentioned environmental factors. Could this be a euphemism for something?
And there's always two things that I note, because the question always comes up, what's the one big thing that you're really afraid of? Because all these things, they pitch fear, and that's kind of where preppers are usually seen. It's like, what are you afraid of? And I don't like to answer the question like that, but I always do have an answer, and it's usually two things. One is our economic situation.
So he makes a lot of good points in the first 10 minutes that's about the economics of America and how people don't expect American economics to fail, and yet history shows they will fail. So I'm actually going to blup through a bit of what he's doing and just put a couple of sound bites up and do some talking a little bit about American empire and about empires in general.
A wake-up call suggests that there's still time to get up and do something. It's going to be a huge change for everyone that's just gotten accustomed to the idea that the United States dollar has a lot of buying power. There's a lot of writing on the wall that we're really getting close to the end of that. And, people talk about getting back to normal. We've been in this difficult situation since COVID came up, and we're talking about we want to get back to normal, Well, you know what? There is no such thing as normal. And if there is, normal for human beings, normal for the human species, is that we are an incredibly non-multitudinous population of a few hunter-gatherer groups spread out over the planet, no technology, no industry, and we kind of just pick and scavenge off the land, and we're at the mercy of various diseases and other predators and things like that. That, if you're going to talk about normal in terms of what have human beings been used to for the most of their existence, that's normal. I don't think anyone wants to get back to that. That's pretty awful.
Yeah, indeed, it was pretty awful compared to what we have now, and only a fool would claim that just being naked in a forest with a knife is actually a preferable way of living for a society or for your family. Of course, there is a lot of confabulous out there that actually do think that, and a lot of times they call themselves survivalists. But the actual people who are doing these videos, generally from what I've noticed, either have cars or homes, and usually both. And they're usually wearing clothes, usually made abroad.
And the historical perspective of what it's like to be a human being is that occasionally there are empires that come up and they're very powerful and the people do very well in those, but they don't tend to last very long. The United States has been in kind of its empire phase. I don't know if that's offensive to you to call it an empire, but a phase where it's a centralized authority and it's got fingers all over the known world.
Although we don't generally refer to America as the American Empire, it is in fact a de facto empire. It has military bases throughout the world, it portrays its power by military and economic means throughout the world. It is the #1 superpower. It has the largest per capita income of anywhere in the planet, though of course it's not very well shared amongst its own people. But again, that's also a characteristic of empire, of consolidation at the top as the foundations start to crumble. Rather than pushing the wealth back down into the foundations to make the foundations strong again, most empires eventually over time, for various reasons, actually crash because they consolidate power and wealth where it's normal at the top, and they use power means to keep the lower masses down as the lower masses' lifestyles become more and more unpleasant. There's been many, many empires throughout the human history. In fact, in the 20th century, the empire was supposed to be Canada. The 20th century, at the end of the 19th century, was supposed to be Canada's. Canada was set up to have a population increase, had raw resources, was in a much better financial position than America, and had more technology than America, and was supposed to actually take over and control most of the earth by the end of the 20th century. Of course, we don't know what the future is going to bring, and of course what happened is the 20th century, by any definition, has really been dominated by the United States of America.
So getting back to normal means getting back to the reality that at some point the American, and again, I know that's offensive to a lot of people to call it an empire, but there's a lot of people that definitely see it that way. Getting back to normal means getting back to the idea that the American empire rises and the American empire falls, and I think we are getting back to normal, and that normal includes the fading of the power of the United States in terms of being a singular world power.
This is of course nothing new. There's been multiple books and videos done on the end of American empire. One of the important things to note here is that it's entirely possible that the American empire may not fade and fall, but it would be very unusual if it does not. All of human history would say to us quite strongly that the normal we know now, the power structures we know now, cannot last more than 2 to 4 to 5 generations. There's been notable exceptions. For example, the Roman Empire lasted very, very long time and did incredibly well for an awfully long time. But its fall, after it fell, well, it took an awfully long time before Rome was even a small city again. Will that happen to the United States of America?
Changes are coming, I think, and they're going to be big changes. They're going to have an enormous impact on people's lives. If you have been alive over the past year or so, and that would mean that you're older than like 1 year old, so I presume that you have, you've seen that things can change pretty dramatically, pretty quickly, and the changes that we've seen over the past year, I think, pale, or will pale, in comparison to the changes that we see coming.
That's a pretty huge claim. What he's claiming is within the next year to 3 year period, I'm paraphrasing him, we're going to see changes that are going to make 2020, 2021, the effect of COVID and also American elections, appear trivial. I actually agree with him. I do think this is coming fast. I think it's coming faster than at any point in my lifetime, and it does give me serious cause for concern. And I really appreciate Praxis breaking his normal mode and actually reaching out to his subscribers in such a way to warn them quite severely they need to harden themselves, really harden themselves, not just get some MREs and a gun, but to actually think strategically and long term about the evil of an economic failure in the West and environmental concerns.
Plan on paying that back very quickly because I don't like living in debt. It makes me feel uncomfortable to feel like I am indebted to but it just makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't think I can describe it to you guys any more than that. I don't like feeling like I'm in debt to someone else. I like to be even Steven Square, let's settle up and everything like that.
I don't think any of us like to feel in debt, and I certainly have definitely tried not to be in debt, though I have incurred enormous debt based upon real estate value here in my home to actually move into an off-grid solar passive property, because I fully agree with Praxis. I do think big changes are coming really soon. I could be wrong, but if not, it's a lifestyle I want to live anyway in retirement, so let's get on it. But I do think he's fooling himself a tiny bit here. The amount of debt Praxis has right now is about $1 million American. That's the debt he has and his son has. In fact, between the two of them, they have $2 million worth of debt. I'm a Canadian, I have about $25,000 to $30,000 of debt. You can look at that any which way you like, but being part of a nation state means that we are actually liable for the debts our nation states have incurred, and they are considerable and rising. Well, it's a really good and entertaining and interesting video to watch, so I do encourage you to watch it, and it is of course linked. However, at this point I am going to stop. There will be a part 2. The part 2 is going to talk about environmental concerns, because I'm not going to go into climate change science and why it's real. But I do think Praxis has a lot of interesting things to say on it. And one of the most interesting things is what he actually says about people that do not accept climate science as realistic or real and bury their heads in the sand. I think it's an important point. A lot of people buried their heads in the sand and still are about SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19. A lot of people fundamentally deny its existence to this date. And in fact, they're so desperate to prove it, they're now actually trying to get the American government, who is looking at it, to see if China deliberately or accidentally released it from a biological warfare lab. Even though most of the United States government knows that's not true, and almost all the world's virologists know that that's not true. It shows no sign whatsoever, never did, never has, of being manipulated. But yet, the desperate desire to see this as something caused by, rather than just a byproduct of natural world, is a fascinating phenomenon. So I do hope you stick around for part 2, where we look at Praxis' viewpoint on environmental concerns, being second only to him to the collapse of the American dollar in terms of things you need to prep for this year. If you like this video, please feel free to give me a subscription or even a thumbs up, because it really helps my limited ego. If you didn't like it, it could be a thumbs down, but tell me why. Hopefully you don't just go, oh, I didn't like that particular phrase, so I'll give you a thumbs down, because that sort of a reactionary response is something Praxis is going to talk about in part 2. Toodles.
This has been a Dog in a Bonnet Productions.
2021.